It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, bills, and yet more bills. A raft of expenses is on the rise, and what's being called awful April. Millions of us are going to be worse off, with annual pay rises not likely to fill the gap. And with Donald Trump set to impose more tariffs tomorrow, things could be about to get even worse. Coming up, we'll find out what's going up, how much you'll be affected, and where you can go for advice and support. Also tonight, a man is shot dead by police in Milton Keynes. It happened at the city's train station as officers responded to reports of a man with a firearm. We'll be there live. Plus, we get the latest from Birmingham, where the bin bags are still building up as the rubbish strike continues. And 4 films for the Fab Four. The cast is confirmed for a series of Beatles biopics directed by Sam Mendes. All that to come and much more here on the UK Tonight. Good evening. Water, energy, council tax, car tax, stamp duty, broadband, mobile phone, the TV licence. So many bills to pay, and there won't be many of us who don't pay at least one of those. But they're all going up. Now it is the start of what's being called awful April, as I'm sure you've noticed. Yes, millions of workers are getting a pay rise too, but because of frozen income tax thresholds, it might not translate into a meaningful increase in the pay they take home. All this comes as well at the same time as stark warnings about what Donald Trump's tariffs could do to the economy. He's due to reveal his plans tomorrow. Here's our political editor, Beth Rigby.
Daily life getting a bit more difficult as millions of us woke up to rising household bills, be it our council tax, energy costs, or the price we pay for our water. The Prime Minister insisting he gets it.
I think for most people, they would say the cost of living crisis is ongoing and they feel the pressure financially. That's why it's so important that we make good on our pledge that people would feel better off. And the national living wage going up today by an average of £1,400 is going to affect millions of people. So I'm not denying there are
you acknowledge people are going to be feeling
I acknowledge
it still.
that with bills coming in, people see that rise, and that is a pressure.
The PM here with bank workers in London to highlight rising wages.
Is that right? Oh, that's really good.
But what isn't good? Incoming Trump tariffs, which brings this Prime Minister a serious economic problem. The OBR budget watchdog today warning tariffs could wipe out the Chancellor's financial headroom in the long term. People are going to be worse off when Trump's tariffs come into effect, won't they?
Well, look, I don't think anybody wants to see tariffs.
But you acknowledge we are going to get them.
Well, look, we're working hard on an economic deal, which we've made rapid progress on, and I hope we can make really speedy resolutions on. But look, the likelihood is there will be tariffs.
On Donald Trump, you have worked so hard with him. You have pulled your punches, you haven't criticised him publicly, and now this. Do you feel played by him?
The US is our closest ally. Obviously, we are discussing economic deals. We're well advanced on it. These would normally take months or years, and in a matter of weeks, we've got well advanced in those discussions.
Tariffs beyond the PM's control, but tax on business is his choice. The controversial hike in national insurance for employers now kicking in, and the Conservatives kicking Labour over it.
Right.
But Badenoch's party with brand problems of its own. Do you acknowledge that the cost of living crisis did start under the former Conservative government, that Liz Truss's mini-budget destroyed your party's reputation on economic credibility? How can you now turn around your own reputation on the economy, and do you think the public are listening to you?
Our reputation was not built in the last few years. It was built over many decades, I would say centuries. The Conservative Party is the party of business. Rishi Sunak was the last Prime Minister, and he left Keir Starmer an economy that was the fastest growing in the G7. All of that is gone.
Just quickly on tariffs, everything you've said today seems to chime with what the Prime Minister is actually trying to do, i.e. no retaliatory tariffs immediately, trying at pace to arrange this economic deal. So on this at least, you're shoulder to shoulder with him and agree with him.
If the Prime Minister does not want to put retaliatory tariffs on, I think that's excellent. That is the right thing to do. Where he does the right thing, we will agree.
I mean, that's a good news story, isn't it? 'Cause
The PM keen to plug his government's action on the national living wage, but with household finances still a big worry for many and a mountain of economic hurdles ahead, this PM with little to cheer. Beth Rigby, Sky News, London.
Well, that's the political picture. Let's take a bit more of a look now at the bills that are going up and how much more you could be paying each month if you can bear to look. Here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelso.
The turn of the month is the turn of the financial year, but bill rises coming on April Fool's Day are no joke. Across the board, households are looking at increases in their communications, council tax, water and energy bills, a total of £448 for the average household. We can see how that compares to last year. Energy bills actually went down quite a lot, albeit from record highs, but the big one this year is water bills. There's been a price review, happens every 5 years, so a big correction in water bills. That gets us to nearly £450 extra on your outgoings. We've talked a lot about energy in the past. That changes every quarter. Water bills are the big change. Now, on average, across the board, they're going up 26%. The regulator sets that figure, £123. But big variations depending on where you get your water. Southern Water, Medway in Kent's this example, is the most expensive in the country. It's gone up 47% or £225. If you're lucky enough to live in the northeast, Northumbrian Water, that's only 19%, £80 on a bill in Sunderland. Council tax has gone up too. Again, there are variations. The average for a council tax band D is 5% on the bills, £108. But let's go to Bradford, where the council applied to the government to put up bills by more than 9%. That's £191. Compare and contrast that with Wandsworth in London, just £29 or 3%. Now, bills are rising, but wages are rising too. We've done some calculations here for households and seen how the balance lies. Now, if you're on the state pension, it's gone up 4.1%. That's an extra £470. You can see from our calculation here, that leaves a pensioner up by nearly £150. What about the minimum wage, the really big move? 6.7% on the minimum wage. That's nearly £1,400 a year. That's paying almost £24,000 if you're working full-time. There's some fiscal drag. That's where the tax thresholds have been frozen, so a bit more tax being paid. But again, our figures leave you ahead of the game by nearly £900. And what about average earners? The median salary is £38,000, two in a household, wages going up 5.8% in January. That's more than £4,300. Even with that fiscal drag, they're still ahead of the game. Now, of course, it may not feel like that because our figures don't account for food inflation, for fuel costs. But looking at these numbers, while bills are rising, so are wages.
Well, that's Paul with how it might affect you. If you visit our app on our website, you'll be able to enter your details into our cost of living calculators, find exactly how you're affected. I did it. It's hundreds and it's painful. We sent our North of England correspondent Katie Barnfield to Manchester to see what the changes mean for people living there.
It's all fun and games for these kids at the Hideaway Play Centre in Trafford. But for some of the parents here, there are serious concerns on their minds.
To do things with the children, to actually have a life of your own as well as pay your bills, I think the balance there is going to massively change.
Laura is a single mum of 3 and a self-employed sports and beauty therapist. Using Sky News' online bill calculator, she discovered she'll now have to find more than £500 extra per year.
People out there, their wages increase to cover that increase. For people like me, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to charge my customers a hell of a lot more money just because everything's gone up. Oh, wow.
For some, the calculations came as a shock.
Total increase by £444, more than I was expecting. Well, I'm currently on maternity leave, but I got made redundant before I had my second child, so for me, I'm probably going to have to start looking for work now.
The government say that pay increases will largely ease the pain of rising bills. But for Bonnie and her family, that isn't the case.
It's very upsetting. It is, because it is struggling now to make ends meet and it's going up again. I'm going to have to put more hours in at work where I can. And probably just cut back on food.
Really that bad?
Yeah.
The Hideaway works on a pay-what-you-can basis to help those struggling to make ends meet. But CEO Ruth says they're not immune from the pressures either.
We're going to be really impacted by the increase in, obviously, wages going up, but more than that, the national insurance going up. It's going to cost us about an extra £60,000 this year alone. Reducing our services in certain areas is a genuine something that we're going to have to look at.
For many families, household costs and the worries that go with them just keep on climbing. Katie Barnfield, Sky News in Trafford.
Now, Citizens Advice says single parents will be worse hit by the bill increases, and I'm joined by one now. It's author Rebecca Cox. Good to see you, Rebecca. How's it affecting you?
I think, like all single parents, every month it feels like the amount that's left over in your account gets slightly smaller. So obviously having all of these price increases at once is a real worry for a lot of single parents.
Because we heard from Paul Kelso there when he was spelling out how these are going to affect people, it doesn't take into account the still increasing cost of food, the still increasing cost of diesel and petrol if people are putting that in their cars. All these other things are, slowly creeping up as well. Inflation's above the 2% target. So you're feeling it even more at the moment.
Well, exactly, because obviously if you're a single parent, all of those things increase double. So there's two of you at home, there's two people to feed. I've got a 9-year-old boy. He eats more than I could ever imagine.
Well, he's growing.
Exactly, and it's only going to be more and more. So while wages are not really going up, I know that minimum wages are going up, but wages for many have not gone up for a very long time, whereas prices continually go up across the board, which means that we have less and less money, not just for ourselves, but for children as well.
Yeah, I'll get onto the wages thing in a second. When it comes to the specific impact on single parents, are you surprised Citizens Advice are saying it hits people like you the hardest?
I'm not surprised at all, no. I think I've been a single parent for 8 years, and in my opinion, the economics of single parenting are by far the biggest barrier to single parents thriving. There are 25% of all families are headed by a single parent, so it's not like this is a new phenomenon or a small group. This is in a massive part of society. And across the board, it's finances that prevent single parents from thriving. And that's not something new, that's not something that's changing, it's something that's getting worse. So the fact that that's finally been highlighted by Citizens Advice Bureau, I think is really important, and that you've invited me on to have this conversation. Absolutely.
Out of all the bills we've listed, of which there are many, which one in particular smarts the most?
I think it's the same for every family. It's the ones that you have no choice in. So where single parents are really used to making cuts to get by, there's an app called Frollo, which is a kind of a single-parent community app, which is amazing. And there's been conversation on there today around what people are most worried about. And one of the comments was, I'm just worried about what I can cut next so that we can continue to live. So I think anything that you've got choice in, obviously there's something you can do. But when it comes to things like
you can't cut council tax.
You can't cut council tax, you can't cut water bills, you have got no choice in those things, you simply have to pay. And when it comes to council tax, the single person discount is 25%, but obviously there's 50% less people to pay that bill in the house.
We mentioned national minimum wage is going up, and a lot of people's pay is going up because we're seeing that even when times have been tough, we've seen wage inflation happening. But still there is a thing called fiscal drag, which the Conservative government did and Labour are sticking with. Is that impacting you? Because for people who don't realise, the thresholds stay the same, even though everybody's earning a bit more. So everyone ends up paying a bit more tax and not getting the benefit of earning more, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you also need to understand with single parents is that there are lots of other factors that can financially impact them across the board, because you might be in a workplace where you're lucky enough to have access to flexible working, which is really important. But those workplaces are quite limited. So your capacity to develop in your career and potentially earn more are very limited. So you're under further economic constraints when you take that kind of thing into consideration as well.
It is tough times. The only saving grace is the weather looks reasonably all right, so people might just turn the heating down a little bit at the moment. That'll save a few quid, potentially. Rebecca, it's good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Next, a man who was reported to have been carrying a firearm has been shot dead by police in Milton Keynes. Let's go straight there now. Sky's Alice Porter is in the city for us tonight. Alice, tell us more about this.
Well, there's still a very heavy police presence here at Milton Keynes Central where the shooting occurred. Since we've been here, we've seen multiple police officers who've gone behind the cordon behind me in front of the station, and they have been there trying to examine the crime scene and piece together exactly what happened earlier today. But what we know is just before 1 o'clock, there were calls to the British Transport Police and Thames Valley Police over concerns of a man who apparently had a gun. Now, Thames Valley Police armed officers arrived on the scene and confronted this man in question, and he was shot. And we know that the armed officers were involved in providing medical assistance to the man in question, and we've seen that from videos that are circulating on social media. But the man in question died at the scene. Now, Thames Valley Police, as is standard in these situations where there is a fatal shooting involving the police, they have referred themselves to the IOPC. They are the Independent Office for Police Conduct. They are the police watchdog. And we know that the IOPC, we've seen some of their staff members who've come here, and they've begun an investigation, really trying to piece together what happened. An important part of that will be trying to ascertain whether the man in question did indeed have a firearm with him and therefore was indeed a threat to the wider public. So the IOPC have begun their investigation into what happened earlier today, in which a shooting by Thames Valley Police and this man in question, who allegedly had a firearm, ended up in a shooting which left a man dead.
Alice in Milton Keynes, thank you very much indeed. Now, Sky News has learned that drivers who have failed roadside drugs tests are continuing to get behind the wheel for months afterwards because of a backlog in blood testing. And shockingly, some of those drivers have even gone on to kill. Our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, has this.
OK, let's start with some shoulder shrugs.
Wonderful mum, wonderful wife, my soulmate, amazing person to be around and be with all the time. And that's why it's such a massive loss to have lost Jane in such a way.
On a Sunday morning, Jane Hickson was killed by a driver who'd gone through a red light. For her husband, John, the grief was compounded by what he learned about that other driver. Because 6 months before he killed Jane, Paul Wright had tested positive for driving under the influence of cocaine. He remained free to drive because police were still waiting for the results of a confirmatory blood test. And Sky News understands that's not unusual. The backlog in blood testing leaving drivers who failed drugs tests on the road for months.
Well, obviously I don't want anybody else to go through this. I'm starting to rebuild my life. Me and my family are starting to rebuild our lives. But the fact is that those people are out there driving under the influence of drugs now, as we're sat here. So people are at risk, and I don't think that's acceptable.
With a bit of saliva in and around your mouth for me now.
Across the country, many police forces report they're now often arresting more drug drivers than drink drivers. This was in Bolton in Greater Manchester recently. With drink driving, though, police have the results almost immediately, and drivers are usually banned within days. Not so with drugs.
You're under arrest on suspicion of driving a motor vehicle while under the influence of cocaine.
This company provides police forces with those initial roadside drug swabs, but these kits used successfully in France and in Australia, testing saliva instead of blood, provide confirmatory results within days.
Saliva is a perfectly acceptable solution, and it can be processed in the laboratory much quicker, and one would hope would not be having these significant number of months delay. So if we could have an evidential confirmation within a week, we could maybe get them in court the week after, which is the same timescale as is acceptable at the moment for alcohol.
The National Police Chiefs Council told Sky News that it's been aware of difficulties in the processing of drug drive blood samples. Currently, it said, the majority of cases are being processed within 6 months. It said we're working closely with forensic providers to ensure that turnaround times on submissions are as efficient as possible to secure the right outcomes. A government spokesperson said drug testing is a complex forensic process that must meet strict legal and scientific standards. We're working closely with policing partners to improve efficiency while ensuring the integrity of results that support prosecutions. But any extra delay for those like Jane Hickson's husband and her sister is too long. For them, it's all the more traumatic because she died at a junction just metres from her home.
It's hard. It's hard to move on for something that was such a senseless way for Jane to die. And I think it's utterly avoidable, completely avoidable. And I think as a society we have to do something about it and accept that there are people out on the roads under the influence of drugs that need to be off the roads as soon as possible.
Greg Milam, Sky News.
Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Is the care system failing vulnerable people? We'll have a special report from our people and politics correspondent Nick Martin on that. Also ahead, the bins continue to build up in Birmingham amid ongoing strikes. We'll have the latest from the city. And the King returns to public duties after suffering those side effects from his cancer treatment. That's coming up after the break.
In the last 5 years, more than 13,000 farmers have left agriculture in the UK.
Is it going to be viable for the future?
No farmers, no food! The frustration, the anger, the fact that so many of them are at risk of going bust has now become too much.
You've got to keep hope because one day it's going to be okay.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
It's scary what's happening in the country.
It's the illegal migrants that we don't want here.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale. Having the police speak to us so starkly right in the middle of the riot showed just how serious the situation was. The water on board the barge contaminated with Legionella bacteria, an outbreak that was first revealed by Sky News. There have been questions for months over whether the support offered to asylum seekers on the bivvy is sufficient.
A cruel place to put human beings.
From busy cities to rural communities, we spend every day reporting on how big decisions impact real people. The last smoke and steam rises into the sky above Blast Furnace 4.
Today is a day in history in Talbot.
The closure means more than 2,000 job losses.
It just seems madness.
It is a highly contagious infection. South West Water did apologise again.
This is the Revenge Porn Helpline.
They're helping terrified victims.
You've been a victim of a very common type of online crime known as sextortion.
We're making things better for people.
Stonehenge became the latest victim of Just Stop Oil.
Now I can say I've been to the orange Stonehenge.
Sky News, get the full story first, free, wherever you get your news.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent. It's really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Now, across the country, people with complex needs and disabilities are coming face to face with a social care system that is simply struggling to help them. Individuals in need of safe, accessible and affordable homes aren't being given the support to find them, with councils still, despite the bills going up today, chronically underfunded. Sky's People and Politics correspondent Nick Martin has been spending time with one young woman who is struggling to find someone to care for her.
So at 11 o'clock at night, I'll be on the streets, and this is serious now, that this is serious.
Chloe Layton's life is spiralling out of control. She's disabled, autistic, homeless, and right now she's panicking.
At the moment, I don't have anywhere to go.
She's pleading with a social worker to find her a place to stay, crammed into a disabled toilet in a pub. recording this conversation because she doesn't trust anyone anymore. Then the social worker on the other end of the line says this. Chloe is on her own. In just a few months, Chloe's life has gone from happy and stable to dangerously unpredictable. It all started last November when Chloe's father suffered a really serious stroke. With no one else to care for her, her local authority, Buckinghamshire Council, had a legal obligation to find emergency accommodation and suitable social care for her. Except she says that hasn't happened.
When Dad had his stroke, they don't care. Dad would keep me safe from all these people. He was the barrier. I'm too bright, but I'm not bright enough without help. And so nobody knows what to do with me, and I fall through the gaps.
Where are you staying tonight?
I don't know.
The council's been paying for Chloe to stay in hotels, but they've stopped paying now after they offered her some temporary accommodation. Chloe refused that accommodation. She says it's not suitable for someone with her disabilities. The law says that accommodation must be suitable for Chloe's needs, but if she refuses somewhere, the council doesn't have to do any more to house her, but it still can support her.
I'm heading out of town to the temporary accommodation that the council have offered Chloe. And actually, looking at the map, it's a good 20-minute drive outside of the town, and it looks pretty remote.
Buckinghamshire Council told us, we stand by the actions of our staff and as an organisation in regard to the content featured in this piece. We take our duty of care extremely seriously in regard to any resident who presents to us with a housing and/or social care need, and follow process and procedures rigorously and to the letter. For the next few days, Chloe's friends and family help to pay for hotel accommodation. But then things take a turn for the worst.
There's no money left, so we're just stuck. I'm going to try and stay in the pub till 11 o'clock, and then that's it, I'm on the street.
So we've been getting regular messages from Chloe for the last few hours, and she's been getting more and more desperate as time goes on. So I'm going to go and see her and see just exactly what's happening.
Ooh, it's cold.
Chloe, it's Nick. So what is going on?
It's been a long day. It's been lots of crying. They said that because I won't go to the hostel that that's it. So I don't know what to do. I've never been like this, so I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do.
It's now 11 p.m.
I think we are going to have to call some police officers to come and chat with you. Oh, hello, I wonder if you can help me.
Oh, thank you.
By now, both the police and council are aware that we are here filming. Chloe's phone lights up again. After weeks of resisting, the council has offered Chloe an alternative. Buckinghamshire Council uses this hotel as emergency temporary accommodation, but straight away there's a problem.
So I can't get through the doors.
For months now, Chloe has been scared that her basic needs won't be met, and she's been told to accept what's on offer and move forward. And now she has. The room isn't wheelchair accessible. She can't go to the toilet here or anywhere else in the hotel. Her basic needs aren't being met. It's 3 a.m. Our few days with Chloe Layton reveals a complicated story. It's about what happens when someone with complex needs comes face to face with a social care system that's chronically underfunded. Understanding autism requires time, resources, money, something councils don't have. And for Chloe, it's about trying to find some calm amid the chaos so she can live her life.
Well, that is a tough watch there, isn't it, seeing Chloe's story from Nick there. You can watch a longer version of that piece as well on our website, and you can find it on our social media as well. We're going to head to Birmingham now, where tens of thousands of tonnes of rubbish is continuing to pile up across the city as that bin strike just rumbles on again. Members of the Unite Union walked out in a dispute over pay way back on the 11th of March now, but waste collections have actually been disrupted since January. The government's been accused of washing its hands by not intervening in the crisis, but the community's minister described it as a local issue. Sky's Amelia Harper has more now from Birmingham.
Well, this is just one of the piles, or should I say mounds of rubbish piling up across Birmingham. You've even got to step over some of the bin bags to make your way through this particular street. And Birmingham City Council, in response to this situation, has declared a major incident to try to deal with this. It's concerned fundamentally about public health and the risk to residents. And looking at this, it is clear it goes further than just putting your black bin bags out. You've got what looks like here a white headboard from your bed, and someone here has even piled up the front of a bonnet of a car. And I think the smell is what hits you. You can smell some of the food and the debris that is piled up in these bags as the weather's getting warmer. And by declaring this major incident, because Unite members have been on strike since the 11th of last month, it allows them to bring in more bin crews and bin collectors to try to deal with some of this rubbish. They've got 35 crews on standby, ready to try to bring in some of this rubbish. But one of the problems has been that these Unite members, who are claiming that the City Council is going to introduce demotions and pay cuts. One of the problems is that they've actually been walking in front of the lorries at walking speed to prevent them from actually getting out and about to try to pick this up. They had talks with Birmingham City Council last week. There was no resolution in sight. And so looking at this, it stretches metres down to the end of the road. Looking at this, there's possibly no end in sight.
There's Amelia Harper amongst the bin bags of Birmingham. Now, the King has returned to official duties after spending time in hospital at the end of last week when he experienced side effects from his cancer treatment. He welcomed dozens of recipients of honours to Windsor Castle this morning. Among them, the world heptathlon champion Katarina Johnson-Thompson was presented with an MBE. Speaking afterwards, she said King Charles was in good spirits. Also honoured today, the gardening legend and broadcaster Alan Titchmarsh, who was made a CBE. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. We'll hear from the retirement village in Northampton where residents are being threatened with prosecution over a licence fee loophole. Also ahead, 4 films for the Fab Four. The cast is confirmed for a series of Beatles biopics. And we'll have the latest from Chester, where a tractor ploughed into 2 houses this morning. Back to awful April now. One of the bills going up today is the TV licence, rising by £5 to £174.50 a year. Some people, though, qualify for a discount, like those in care homes and sheltered accommodation. But at one retirement village in Northampton, the elderly residents there are being threatened with prosecution due to a loophole. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, has been taking a look.
This sort of thing should be going on.
Embroiled in a battle over the BBC, it's been a stressful few months for Stan Fritton and residents at St Crispin's retirement village.
This is being sent to 95-year-old widows in here that have no family and all the rest of it, and they're seeing something, an investigation open with a big stamp and a what's the name.
It's intimidating.
Oh, it is. Frightens them to death.
Before last November, they were paying £7.50 a year to watch the BBC at a reduced cost, qualifying for an ARC licence. ARC standing for Accommodation for Residential Care.
It's not a home like yours.
No.
But this room, which they wanted to house overnight visitors, changed that.
Has anyone actually been here, Stan?
No, they haven't. I mean, that's the frustration of it all.
Told by post that they'd contravened the TV Licensing Act, but they argue this clearly isn't a dwelling. For now, they've shut the space down to try to get it back, but their big frustration is that they found it impossible to talk this through with anybody.
They're not listening, and they're choosing not to listen, and they're choosing to prolong this situation. They're choosing to antagonise residents here, needlessly, quite needlessly.
TV Licensing in a statement saying they continue to liaise with managers at St Crispin's and hope to have this matter resolved as soon as possible.
How the BBC collects its money is an issue that extends way beyond this one retirement village. For many who are on modest means, the cost of the licence fee going up by a £5 on April the 1st of all days is a bit of a bad joke. And under the current BBC charter, prices will now rise for the next 2 years based on inflation.
As a former BBC News controller and government communications director, Sir Craig Oliver has seen the BBC charter negotiations from both sides.
I think everybody has come to the conclusion, including privately the BBC, that they have to come up with another model. There will probably be some element of the licence fee still existing, but it may be that there are subscription models on top of that. The problem with all of that, of course, is that the devil is in the detail. How do you make sure that people aren't hacking in?
This year, the BBC says it's launching its biggest ever public engagement exercise so audiences can help shape the corporation. But with seemingly little or no consensus over how the future might be funded, the only certain thing is it means households being switched on to prices going up this year, next year and the one after that. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Now, when it comes to biographical movies, there are big shoes to fill. And then there are the Beatles. But the cast has now been confirmed for the collection of films, one for each member of the Fab Four. Here they are, from left to right. Harris Dickinson, the tallest one, will play John Lennon. Paul Mescal will play Sir Paul McCartney. Barry Keoghan will play Ringo Starr, Sir Ringo Starr, I should say. And Joseph Quinn is going to play George Harrison. We're told the films, which will be directed by Sir Sam Mendes, will be released in proximity to each other in April 2028. Beatles and pop culture author Dr. Richard Mills, in his Beatles jumper, joins me now in the studio, which was a sweater that George Harrison, not the actual one, but it's a version of a sweater that George Harrison wore.
George Harrison wore this in the studio to sort of deflect the criticism that the Beatles were getting.
Yeah, which they
when they first went to America, there was a lot of anti-Beatles feeling from the older generation.
Well, let's talk about any Beatles cast feeling right now. Let's have a look at them. So we've got John Paul, Ringo, and they're the wrong way around for a start.
Yeah.
It could be John Paul, George, and Ringo, shouldn't it? But anyway, John Paul, Ringo, and George. Do you think they fit the bill?
I do. It's very interesting that there was a biopic of Brian Epstein out very recently, and there was a problem with the height in that because John Lennon was very diminutive, shall we say. The actual heights of the Beatles, John Paul and George all come in around about 5'11", and Ringo was 5'7". So just look
Keoghan's right.
Yes. So looking at this picture, I think they've nailed it as far as that's concerned. Also, I think age is very important here. This is age appropriate as well. I've watched every Beatles biopic. I was totally obsessed with them. And quite often they would get someone much older playing the younger Beatles in a silly-looking wig. I mean, Christopher Eccleston must have been in his 40s when he played John Lennon in a long wig. Now, these guys look...
They're late 20s, early 30s,
yes.
so they're about the... Although, let's not forget, the Beatles were coming up in their early 20s and they were done before they'd hit 30, weren't they?
Yes, absolutely. What's so interesting about the Beatles is that George Harrison was 26 years old when the Beatles broke up.
Wow.
So you can imagine the impact that would have on the psyche of a young man, almost
Richard,
a child star.
Richard, let me ask you, you're a doctor, because you lecture on the Beatles and you've got books and you've got another book coming out about it and, you know, you're so steeped in this. Do we need 4 films, 1 for each Beatle? Could that be seen as a bit of overkill?
It could be seen as a little bit excessive, but I don't think so for a couple of reasons, because I'm not usually a big fan of biopics. They're very cliched, they're very stereotypical. They usually follow this rise and fall of the band, and the tropes, the imagery, the cliches, the story becomes really quite boring. So I think to breathe some life and some colour into a biopic, you've got to do something radically different. So looking at it from 4 different perspectives, I think is going to be incredibly innovative and incredibly exciting.
Yeah, the producer's saying it will be bingeable cinema, certainly a different device. In terms of telling the story, though, this one is sanctioned by the remaining Beatles. I think the estates of George and John, who are no longer with us. So we've seen a film recently about Led Zeppelin where the accusation was, because it was sanctioned by Led Zeppelin, they didn't really get under the skin of the story. Can this do that? Can this really tell the story if the remaining Beatles are sort of behind it to a degree?
I don't think it does. I think you always get a very sanitised version of the Beatles story. When the machinery behind the Beatles, when Apple, when Sony, all these people are involved in it, you get quite... you don't really get to the grit as much. But I would temper what I just said with the fact that this is a very radical way of looking at it, because you're looking at the same story from 4 different angles. So that might mix it up a bit. You might get a fractured sense of what Beatlemania was like, what it was like for 4, you know, really sort of quite scruffy, you know, misfits from Liverpool to become the biggest band there's ever been. So there might be sort of like shattered glass. There might be a more fragmentary way of looking at the story. Because, I mean, the cliches, the rise, the fall, the breakup, the mop tops, I hope they do avoid a lot of those cliches.
We've got 2 Londoners there, 2 Irishmen. Obviously, the Beatles had Irish backgrounds, at least Lennon and McCartney did. Who do you think out of the 4, for people who are watching this right now, so they're not Beatles fans at all, they can't stand the Beatles, who out of the 4 of them do you think will have the most interesting film?
That is such a good question. I would imagine that there's going to be obviously a very different perspective. If they tap into the Beatles characters at all, we could possibly get a very sunny, optimistic, rose-tinted version from Paul. Maybe a slightly cynical, wary of fame approach from the George character. John, again, quite cynical. Ringo, probably quite good-humoured. Just can't believe what's happened to him. But I think what all 4 perspectives will share is the bemusement, the sort of how wide-eyed they're going to be at their success. And the way to deal with that massive success is to have good humour and joke about it. Because you can't imagine to be that famous at that age, to be thrown into the eye of the hurricane, this maelstrom.
It's unprecedented. I mean, I guess Elvis went before them, of course. But I think it'll be fascinating to see the films. Richard, thank you very much indeed. Good to see you.
Lovely to see you, and plug my book.
I think you've just done it, Richard. Well done, you.
OK, thank you.
OK, to Chester now, where a tractor has crashed into 2 houses, causing extensive damage. Police said officers received reports of a collision with a Mercedes car on the A51 Vickers Cross Road. The tractor then careered into the buildings. There were no serious injuries, luckily, but the drivers of both vehicles were then taken to hospital as a precaution. Still to come here on the UK Tonight. Why a judge has likened buskers in Leicester Square to psychological torture. I'll be talking to one. And in the sport, we'll look at what Liverpool boss Arne Slot had to say about the speculation around Trent Alexander-Arnold's future.
This is how you travel when the mafia wants to kill you.
He's almost given up his own freedom, but that's the price he's willing to pay.
Here, they don't just arrest and 'ndrangheta mafia members, they also live among them.
Time after time, I've seen the devastating impact of extreme weather and climate change.
We don't have much snow at the moment.
They've had a warm spring and exceptionally hot summer, and that means they're expecting to lose more than 3 times the amount of ice than they usually do.
Flames are still forcing people from their homes and leaving many questioning their futures.
Here was my life. We have nothing. I can't say anything, it's so sad.
This disaster is testing the resolve of everyone on this island.
The only way out now is by boat.
Everything you see is devastated, and the misery being felt by people living here is repeated in towns and villages across Central Europe.
Sky News, get the full story first.
Turkey is burying its dead. The loss is profound.
Whole families died in this collapse, generations wiped out.
The violence has penetrated the heart of the city rather than being contained to the estates around the edge, and that speaks to the level of anger being felt here. In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash. This is just a small sample of the deadly arsenal taken off the streets.
This is an example of an advert, really. Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million, and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
I want to start the programme today with an aim, a story that I can't get out of my head. The campaign has now started. This is your chance. Tell people. This is the politics hub. It's not correct. The tax burden is projected to go up.
No, but
I'm not. This is my interview. Look, this is ridiculous.
No one does care about us.
I'm really interested in that. On the politics hub, you like to push the boundaries. He's got the majority. The question is, what is he going to do with it?
Welcome back. Coming up, a judge orders Westminster Council to pull the plug on performers in Leicester Square. I'll be speaking to a busker about that in just a few moments. But first, David is here in the studio with the sport. Evening to you. It is the Merseyside derby coming up tomorrow. We've had this huge break for the international football, of course.
Yep.
But today, Arne Slot has been talking, the Liverpool manager. What's he been saying?
Well, he's been talking about, well, the man that he's pictured with here, Trent Alexander-Arnold. Although I think it's fair to say, I mean, you mentioned it's the Merseyside derby, and Arne Slot is experienced enough to knows that that's already a feisty enough fixture at the best of times. We saw what happened at Goodison Park earlier in the season.
We did.
But he doesn't want to inflame matters anymore when it comes to this man here, because he knows that obviously there is huge interest from Real Madrid in the player. And interestingly, actually, you know, he wants to sort of try and play this down a bit, because the last time that there was speculation around Trent Alexander-Arnold's future, they were playing another of their great rivals. It was Manchester United who came to Anfield. It was a 2-2 draw, a point which was seen as a better point for United than it was for Liverpool. And Trent was very much below par that game, wasn't he? So, you know, the inference was that it sort of got into his head a little bit. But obviously, there's been plenty of ex-players who've decided to kind of wade in on this debate as to whether he should be, you know, going to Real Madrid or not. It's fair to say that the way that Arne Slot dealt with this was to talk about all 3 players who are out of contract in the summer. Of course, It's not just Alexander-Arnold, it's Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk as well. And actually saying, well, do you know what? Ultimately, they're under contract and they should still be performing from here until the end of the season.
All of these 3 players have done an incredible job this season and also all the seasons before for this football club, and I assume and expect that they will do the same in the upcoming 2 months, where with Trent, of course, we have to wait because he's injured.
And when is he due to return?
That's going to take a few weeks still.
So the good thing about that is that as far as Trent Alexander-Arnold's concerned, he won't be playing against Everton in that Merseyside derby because he is injured. But of course, nevertheless, until there is any kind of movement on these 3 contracts, the question will still be asked. But that is as far as tomorrow's games are concerned. 3 Premier League games in progress tonight.
Staying connected is vital for business. Sky Business sponsors this report.
Having Harper made football more enjoyable. You don't get stuck on a bad game or a bad training, you just get to go home and see a smiley little face. Football just became so much better for me, and getting to travel the world with her has just been the best thing in the world.
Katrina, can you talk me through the day that you walked into that IVF clinic a few years ago? What was going on in your head?
There wasn't much going on in my head. I tried to not really think about what was about to happen. My period's always spot on the day, and on that day that I walked in, I got my period, and I think it was about a week early. Literally, when I spoke to the doctor, he said, "We can start today." I think which was probably meant to happen because I wasn't able to really think about the process, what I needed to do, all the medication I needed to go on. To be honest, I hadn't researched it that much. I just went into the clinic to kind of get a bit more information and see.
Sky Business sponsors this report.
Thank you, David. Now, a judge in London has compared busking to, get this, psychological torture. Clearly doesn't like it. Westminster City Council has been ordered to pull the plug on performers using amplifiers in Leicester Square after repeated complaints from local businesses. One of the complainants was Global Radio, in fact, which said staff were forced to work in cupboards to escape the noise. Joining me now is a busker who goes by the name Ozma. Good evening to you, Ozma. What do you make of this?
Well, firstly, thank you for allowing me to come on here and speak on behalf of the buskers of Leicester Square. This has obviously been a bit of a shock to us, to be honest. It's been a bit of a whirlwind of emotions. When we first got told what was going on with Global Radio, we were quite confused, to be honest, because we were actually completely unaware of the severity of complaints from businesses, as the council hadn't communicated them with us. So we collectively have all felt a certain way around the situation. And at first we were actually quite upset with Global Radio because obviously it's a radio station and we're singers. So it was a bit of a shock that a radio station was complaining about music.
Sure, but Ozma, they choose what they want to play. That's the difference, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, it's one of those things where we've kind of collectively come to a conclusion that the massive thing here is that there's been no communication from the council. If there was, we are all a massive group of super kind, talented people. And I can tell you for a fact that if someone from Global or the council or any business came up to us and said, "Hey guys, do you mind turning it down?" we all would happily comply. So I think, if the council had communicated with us like they said that they have been, then there wouldn't have been as much as an issue.
I've got 2 daughters and they love Taylor Swift and she is incredibly talented, but I don't even want to listen to her day in, day out doing the same tunes. So can you kind of see where they're coming from with this? Because over and over again, is that not psychological torture?
I mean, yes, I do understand that to an extent. Obviously, again, this is something that hasn't been communicated to us. We've all just read it through the newspapers and the news articles. Obviously, most of us do have specific set lists that we sing that are, people pleasers. It's stuff that people like to hear that aren't there every single day. But I guess, with these conversations being had, this is something that we could definitely look into trying to maybe put different songs into our playlists day in and day out instead of singing the same songs every day. And I think that would definitely help, as well as, having smaller speakers to control the noise levels as well.
I've been playing, we've only got a minute left, by the way, so I want to come at it from a different tack. I've been playing devil's advocate a little bit. I have no doubt that you're a fantastic singer and very talented. How do people respond to you? Do they tend to give you a tip? I don't know if you have a card machine, whatever it happens to be. Are people, on the whole, positive?
Yeah, I mean, personally myself, I've never really had any negative feedback from the public. It's all, you know, we get amazing crowds, all of us, sort of specifically in the Leicester Square area. You know, people have actually travelled from different parts of the country just to come and watch us. A lot of us do post videos on social media, so that's how people can see what we're doing. And overall, it is positive.
Good. And just final question. If one day you did get that record deal, I'm sure you would love to have, would you mind if Global Radio played your records?
I mean, I'm not a person that holds grudges at all. I mean, I totally understand. After a lot of conversations, I do understand to an extent where they're coming from.
Okay.
And I hope that we can work together and hopefully figure out a good middle ground. So
Absolutely, Ozma. Listen, best of luck with it. And you never know. When you are famous and you're not busking, come back and talk to us, please.
100%.
All right. Appreciate that. Well, Global Radio have not commented on what was said in court today, but a spokesperson from Westminster City Council said, we absolutely recognise how much value street performers bring to Westminster, and we want to make sure they can continue adding to the area's rich heritage. However, balancing this with the needs of businesses and residents isn't easy. There are lots of competing factors to consider, which means we have to make some difficult decisions. We are still digesting what the court ruling means for us and looking at all the options available. But in the meantime, we're working with the police to address noise complaints and will take action when necessary. But if you do see Ozma, give her a tip. Time for a look at the weather now.
The ideal atmosphere, whatever the altitude. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
It will be mostly fine, dry and settled this week with plenty of warm sunshine by day, likely bringing the highest temperature of the year so far. But clear skies means it'll turn chilly overnight, as I'm sure you spotted. Most places dry and clear this evening, but there'll be quite a chilly wind too.
Breathtaking views with clear skies ahead. Qatar Airways sponsors the weather.
That is all from us here on the UK Tonight. It's The World with Yalda up next. I'll see you tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Bye for now.